Hello and welcome back to another episode of Star Technology. Glad to see you again. Last episode we left off after getting Mark II fusion reactors, and we started to amass some fusion materials, with the most prevalent being trinium and europium from this. We didn't do much besides set up a few more ABSs between episodes, so today we're just going to pick up by upgrading our research setup in order to research what we'll need to progress from here. The goal is to get 4 HPCAs now that we have access to Tritanium, but first we're going to have to upgrade this to at least 32 CWU per tick so we can research network switches. Without a network switch, the maximum is 48 CWU per tick, which will still allow you to research mostly UV parts, but in order to research anything more advanced, we'll need that network switch. We're also still going to need bridging components on each one of these for them to be compatible with this switch, but since I'm waiting on these to craft, I'll just put an empty component in its spot to show off the layout I use for these. Because the bridging component takes up a spot on its own, this limits us to a maximum of 36 CWU per HPCA, but no matter, because we only need 144 CWU to research everything we need to get the classic Stargate. Even if we could get 48 out of each one of these, we would still need 4 HPCAs, so the bridging component doesn't really bother me. After researching our network switch and setting it up with 3 more HPCAs, we'll have enough to not worry about upgrading a research station again, but we still have to set up a sterile clean room in order to make data modules to research anything more advanced. Making the clean room will cost quite a bit of europium and tritanium, but thankfully we've had some time to build up fusion metals since last episode, so making the sterilizing clean room filters was a piece of cake for us. There's nothing special really to these sterile clean rooms, they're just a more expensive clean room with more advanced recipes, but for some reason gameplay dictates that we can't do a regular clean room and sterile clean room recipes on the same machine, so if you try to put a cleaning hatch on a multi-block in a sterile clean room, it'll quit doing sterile recipes. There's some things we'll need the sterile clean room for after we get the classic Stargate, but for now we just need it for the sterile growth medium line. SGM isn't all too difficult, and I really think it's the best application for a requester subnet in this pack. I've explained requester subnets before, but basically we're just going to be putting patterns on all of our machines on this subnet and ordering the final products on requesters for this. It didn't work well when we attempted this on Platinum Line earlier in the run because Platline had significantly more steps, but it's way less likely to break down on sterile growth medium. If requester subnets are something you guys want to see a tutorial on in the future, I can probably make that happen, but as for now I'm going to move on with describing the line. There's a couple inputs we'll need to round up to get this made, but I'll let you know how I got each of them to make things easier for you. The inputs we need are salt from seawater processing, fish from the aquatic entangler, nequadria from neckline, calcium, and a bit of phosphorus from apatite processing, plant balls from slime essence, and osmium and iridium, which come from platline. We didn't have to for all of them, but we made the whole line with UV machines aside from one LCR that I put on top of the machine cubby here. I'm sure you could save some materials by using lower tier machines for this, but I didn't want it ruining the aesthetic here. Either way, it should keep up with demands just fine. To finish the line off, I usually make sure to set the requesters to 10,000 stem cells and 256 buckets of sterile growth medium, and then I show those to my main net. Once all of that is done though, we'll be able to use these stem cells and sterile growth medium we cultivated to turn it into UHV circuits and data modules. That requires setting a lot more patterns and waiting on research for a bit, but to save you from the torture of waiting I had to go through, I'll skip all of that. At this point, the next most urgent thing on our to-do list is upgrading power. We've scaled Steam up until this point so far since we've unlocked them at Clean Room, but at this point it would be too insane of me to try and scale this any further, so we're going to start using Plasma for power. Like I said before, I'm not updating to the most recent version for this run, so we're still on Zeta hotfix 5, but the best plasma as far as EU per tick per fusion reactor in this version and previous versions is helium plasma. It's a little broken since it's the first plasma you unlock from these, and you can just start off by making it in recycled Mark 1s, so I suggest using it. If you're on Ada though, the most recent version at the time this video came out, the best plasma pre-gate is now iron plasma, but you don't unlock it until Mark 3, and then the plasma you can make in the Mark 1s isn't even worth it. Unfortunate, but probably more balanced. Oh well. On that note though, there is an up-to-date turbine energy calculator for Star Technology made by Quarantinium that I'll be linking in the description below. It's a useful tool that works for all turbines in this pack, so feel free to use it. I'll just be using our old Mark 1s to make helium plasma for now, but all I'm doing is supplying these with tritium and deuterium and pumping the helium plasma into a subnet for all of our plasma turbines to see. I'm getting my inputs for this mostly from centrifuging down hydrogen in parallel centrifugal units, since hydrogen seems to be a way better source than air distillation for fuel here. These turbines are pretty dense, so we don't need a whole lot for now to satisfy our power needs, but later on we'll switch our plasma production to Mark 3s, so we'll make more turbines then. Mark 3s are kind of the end goal for today's video, and we do have all the materials we need to get them made, but there's a couple problems with our infrastructure that I feel like I need to address before we start making them. The first significant bottleneck I noticed was our circuit assemblers, so I ended up building 4 of these by our reactors. Thankfully, the cleaning maintenance hatch we unlocked with Mark II fusions means we don't have to shove all these in a clean room, and scaling them is way less annoying. I added some blocks to the front of these to make them look a bit prettier here, but with those hooked up to AE2, the next bottleneck I would like to address is our mixers. We've been running with 4 CubeJS mixers for most of this run, which has served us well, but at this point we're starting to get limited by the fact that these don't do parallels, so it's time to set up some large mixing vessels. At this point in progression, these IV multi-blocks have become pretty cheap, so it doesn't take us long to craft the casings. However, due to space constraints in this building, I decided not to wall share these, which means AE2 is going to be quite a bit more annoying than it usually would be. I already dug a tunnel between floors so I could hook up all the AE2 stuff, but I'm going to be setting up these mixers the same way I have my alloy blast smelters, just because they'll need different circuit settings. There are 4 different circuits I'm concerned about with these mixers, and we'll have to make a separate subnet to correspond with each one. Each of these subnets has its own pattern provider that will go into it, but from here we just need to get around to attaching these to the inputs on our multi-blocks. Once again, because there's 4 different subnets, we'll need 4 stocking input buses for each of our mixers, and we'll need to turn on autopull and distinct buses so this works properly. These stocking buses are nice because they share their inventories with every other bus on the same subnet, but the drawback to them is that they only update every 5 seconds. This is for performance reasons, but they don't work very well with blocking mode on pattern providers because of this. The best solution to this problem that I can think of is just to multiply our recipe inputs to ridiculous sizes with a pattern provider so that no matter what, our recipes take longer than the update times, eliminating it as a bottleneck. If you're wondering why I'm not using program circuit cards to handle settings, it's partially just because I hate them, but in the words of Half, systematically, having the ingredients and circuit settings in the same place makes it easier to reliably ensure that the right circuit is presented to the machine when the ingredients are. It's possible to have 2 separate distribution methods, but making both deliver side by side in a tick-perfect manner is quite difficult. In simpler terms though, they just don't work properly with stocking inputs. Since I'm working in a bit of a constrained space, I decided to do silly stuff with wireless connectors instead to avoid going insane from compact spaghetti syndrome. I wouldn't be surprised if doing it like this might be laggier in some way than hooking it up normally, but I think the server can handle it. All of our outputs from these will go directly back into the mainnet, so I have to go around and hook all that up too, but once everything is hooked up and we test it to make sure it's all working, we'll be good to move on. The next and final part of infrastructure I wanted to update before starting Mark III donuts is chem plants, since we're starting to run out of neckline products and we're going to need way more trinium and nequadria from here on out. I didn't set up chem plants earlier just because I had more products than power before now, but since we recently upgraded power, I have the freedom to build these and sink all the energy I can into them. The main point to chemical plants is to help performance, since they allow you to skip all the steps for neckline, platline, and several other chemical processing lines. For some reason, the neckline skip's fastest parallel setting is on 34 parallels, but this is just a reminder that the highest number parallel isn't always the fastest. Sometimes you have to mess with parallels on passive lines to see what's best.
Neckline will require 2 chem plants, just because fluoroantimonic has its own recipe that loops back and forth with the other plant, but all we have to do now is show this subnet Nequata dust from our ore processing, and it will turn it into neckline products for us. I'll set up more chem plants later for more line skips, but for now we're not really lacking on any of the things we can get from these, so I'm going to push that task off for later. They keep on adding more chemical line skips to these each update, but for the most part it's a lot of polymer recipe skips, so I advise putting 1 or 2 of these down for auto crafting too sometime. With neckline handled though, that's pretty much all the bottlenecks I wanted to take care of before moving on, so I'm going to put a ridiculously large craft for 16 Mark III fusion reactors in and just wait it out. Since this craft will take a while and I don't have much else to do, I'm going to do something I wouldn't normally and talk over some footage of me building. Even with solid infrastructure, this phase of the game is bound to take a bit of waiting time, but thanks to that, you get to watch me build in low FPS for a little bit. I'm just doing details on the upper floors of the donut building right now, but I wasn't really sure what to use for the railing along the edges here. I'm not really a huge fan of this block, but for lack of finding a better option, I just used purple locomotive casings. The different face rotations made it kind of annoying to place down, so I kinda wish I chose something else, but if someone thinks there's a better block I could use for these rails that fits the color scheme, feel free to leave it in the comments and I'll consider changing these. I wouldn't normally be too keen to redo a bunch of create copycat blocks, but in this case I'm not opposed to it. I would prefer a block that matches the GT lamps well in purple, but this is the best I could do on my own. The rest of this tower is just going to be used for stacking fusions, and I think I'll reserve some of the space for post-gate lines on the upper floors, but even with a base this size, I'm thinking that we might run out of space in these towers. We'll probably have to hide some gate prep machines underneath the base inside the terraforming, but I think that's something we'll have to worry about in the next episode. It took quite a bit of fiddling around, but I have all those copycat blocks filled, so all I have to do to finish up here is add some decorations to these upper balconies. These little computer cubby thingies up here are my creations, though they aren't intended to be anything specific, I just think they look nice. I kinda want to add more decorations to these balconies since they look pretty plain right now, but at least these stations help with that a little bit. I had a fox on the top floor of the orange building that we tried to keep around for accounting, but he kept jumping off the edge and eventually he was no longer there before I could show him off. Rest in peace, Finance Fox Fred, you will be missed. I'm kinda out of things to yap about here, and I have enough fusion blocks now to start making these Mark III reactors, so let's move on to that. For these, I'm going to start out by stacking a few Mark IIIs on top of our Mark IIs so we can turn them on and transfer our subnet up to it, then we can destroy the Mark IIs. With some Mark IIIs set up though, there's a new fusion metal that we're going to have to pattern for these. Including the ones that we've had to keep in stock up to this point, we're now going to have to keep Nequadria in stock to produce liquid neutronium. Neutronium is basically the backbone material of the Stargate, so we're naturally going to need to get our hands on a lot of this. It sucks, but you're going to have to spam quite a few Mark III fusions for this not to be a major bottleneck in your conquest for a Discord role. I recommend shooting for the range of 40 Mark III fusion reactors with a couple extra to produce plasma. The amount used for power is entirely going to depend on the type of player you are, but I've consistently gotten away with running only 8 on plasma for previous versions, so that's what I'm going to do again for this run. I just turned all of our Mark 1s and Mark 2s into Mark 3s for plasma, so all I have to do from here is finish connecting my plasma subnet to these so we can continue producing plasma. Now that we have fusions and we're producing neutronium, all I really have to do for now is wait on crafts and finish spamming donuts before we move on to Stargate preparation. This pretty much puts us in the final stretch to getting another classic Stargate, and it's been a mostly fun journey getting this far, but now this means crafts are going to start looking a lot larger and costlier. I think that's a word. I feel like most of my infrastructure is where I want it to be for this stage in the game, aside from some RHFs and bulk freezers that we unlocked with neutronium just now, but other than that, we should be well prepared. If you're playing along with me, I would like to tell you congratulations for getting this far, because it takes a little bit of dedication. These upcoming crafts may seem rough, but if you've gotten this far, you can certainly power through the rest of the pack with fusion spam and some AFK time. At this point, I'm pretty confident that we'll have a Stargate to show off in the next episode, so I'm pretty excited to get around to that, but this is where I'm going to have to wrap up our episode for today. If you're wondering about the title and my thumbnails skipping ZPM, it's because ZPM as a tier blends into LUV and UV too much, and it doesn't even have voltage in the name like every other tier, so there's your explanation. Thanks for watching this to the end though, and as always, don't be afraid to put any questions you might have about today's projects in the comments. Can't wait to see you on the next one. Ciao!